Welcome to the latest live stream, then, courtesy of Seahawks Draft Blog. Rob Staton, joined by the amazing Jacson Bevens today. Jackson, it has been years and years since we jumped on a podcast. Back in the day, back when the Seahawks were a little more successful than they have been, back in 2013. So it's great to speak to you again. We've got a lot to fit in 30 minutes, but it's great to have you with it. My only disappointment is that you're not smoking a cigar.
I was about to, and I think I was too far away from the Wi-Fi outside, so I had to move it in. But check this, I got it. I had it ready to go right here.
Well, there's a lot to get through. Let's just cut to the chase, because we've only got about half an hour, because we're doing another podcast afterwards. So in the last few days, this Russell Wilson saga is continuing. Michael Silver's had a lot to say, and he's essentially said that there's smoke and there's fire. He's been on a podcast today with Adam Shine, and he's kind of updated the situation. Just a few words that he said. He said, on paper, it is savable. It's salvageable, this relationship, but it's not trending that way. Wilson is frustrated enough to be eyeballing other places. That is real. There's a lot of frustration in the building too, from the Seahawks point of view, and that would have to be bridged as well. He says there will be serious talks about a trade, but it's going to take a big, big price to get him. And then he finishes with this. Jody Allen has been more detached as an owner. A more engaged owner would have dealt with this by now. If Paul Allen were alive, probably Russell Wilson would have already been traded, which is quite the statement that Michael Silver's made there. So, look, we've all sort of heard the ins and outs of this saga that's been going on for a month now. Where do you stand on this whole topic?
Well, I think it's really unlikely that he gets traded, and I think it would be really foolish unless someone like Deshaun Watson is coming back. Dak Prescott would have been another one where you say, okay, maybe you can make that work, but clearly that's not going to happen now. You read all of these articles that are super vogue right now to pick potential trade destinations and people working up these mock trades, and I haven't seen a single one that I could imagine Seattle signing off on. I mean, the price is just so exorbitant, and this isn't a roster that's set up to take 2 or 3 years to rebuild. Like, if you're going to trade a quarterback that is capable of winning 10 to 12 games every year, because that's what he does, you need to replace him with someone that can do that or come close and free up enough money to do the rest. I will say I did really, really appreciate your insight into kind of the cap hit situation, because that for me was the biggest roadblock, was eating $39 million in dead cap space. But you did a really good job breaking down how, yes, that's true, but it's also kind of not true. I would bet almost anything that Seattle is, or that Russell Wilson's the starting quarterback for Seattle this year, and I would assume for 2022 as well.
See, what I can't understand, Jackson, is this all seems to be based around the fact that Russell Wilson wants to play offense in a certain way. He wants to have a certain amount of input into not just the offense, but perhaps personnel. Now, what I don't get is, if you're not willing to grant him that, why did you give him $35 million a year in 2019? If you don't want to do that, if you want to have a quarterback who just gets on with playing football and doesn't have any major say, they probably should have just traded him 2 years ago, got a haul, and done what they wanted to do. By giving him the money, I think his expectation should have been, I'm going to have a huge input and a huge say in the direction of the Seahawks.
Yeah, and I think one thing to keep in mind, we've gotten so used to and so comfortable with the pairing of Pete Carroll and Russell Wilson. And Rob, I agree with your point tremendously. I mean, you're going to give the guy, 15% of your cap or more. There's going to be influence that comes with that. And Russell Wilson's very open about being in legacy mode. He's already reached that pinnacle of saying, 3 to 5 backs in the NFL. Now he wants to be one of 3 quarterbacks of all time, and he's looking for Tom Brady leverage, and wants to have that kind of impact. And honestly, I'm totally fine with that. If you're going to spend that money and contribute that much of total cap to where they have to be really involved. So, first half of the year on so encouraging. The second half, it does sound like he's with Shane Waldron, and that sounds at least involved in that hire. So but yeah, it's hard to say. But anyway, used to Russell Wilson and Pete Carroll being together, it's easy to forget it is an eternity in the NFL. You just don't see head coaches and quarterbacks be together for 10 years outside of the Patriots. The Patriots broke the expectation one has realistic definition less anymore because they won 6 Super Bowls in 20 years and won like 40 straight division titles. But 10 years is a long time. Two egos in Pete Carroll and Russell Wilson from two different generations who want to play football in two different ways. And split is probably at some point. I don't think it's this year. I don't think it makes any sense this year, but after this year, yeah, maybe you choose which one of those you want to hitch your future to. Now, hitching it to a 71-year-old head coach over a 32-year-old quarterback seems insane to me, but who knows?
I think you're just breaking up a little bit there, Jackson. I don't know if there's a slightly better position you could sit in. It's just breaking up a little bit. I'll talk while you find in a better spot. I mean, I'd like your views. I'll give you my opinion, and I'd love to hear your take on it because I'd like my view to be challenged on this.
Yes,
I just worry that the relationship is permanently broken. I think that Wilson really does crave the input that he's essentially implied through his source in the media that he wants. I think that he wants to play a brand of offense which is aggressive, which is up-tempo, which is we're going to try and score 30 or 40 points and you're going to have to stop us. And I think that that's his sort of viewpoint. And I don't think he has any interest in playing Pete Carroll football anymore. And I think that there's a very specific reason why I named those 4 teams. And I think it was because they've all got offensive-minded head coaches and they might be willing to play his brand of football. Mm-hmm. And I think when he sees Tom Brady saying, get me Rob Gronkowski and the Bucks get him, and get me Antonio Brown and the Bucks get him. And let's not forget Wilson wanted Antonio Brown in Seattle. Mm-hmm. I think he also wants to have that respect when he turns to a coach or a GM and says, please get me this guy. And I don't think Pete Carroll feels that that's how you run a football team, where a quarterback has that level of input. I think Pete wants to finish his career doing it his way. The big reason that Pete left USC was to come to Seattle and do it his way without anybody really meddling or anything like that. And I wonder whether or not Russell just thinks, I've loved Seattle. It's not that he hates Pete all of a sudden. It's not that he's desperate to get away from the Northwest. It's simply, I want to get to here and I only get one career. And I want to be an MVP, and I want to play my way, and I want to try and win Super Bowls. And I don't think I'm going to do that in Seattle anymore. And I think that that's essentially where he's come to. I think the fact that he's voiced it in the way that he has through his agent has probably soured a lot of the relationship in terms of the Seahawks are probably just saying, we can't do this every year. We can't have Mark Rodgers talking to his friends in the media every 12 months when Russell's got an issue. And I just wonder whether both parties at this stage, I've tried to read the tea leaves a little bit with it, and Mike Silver's very connected to the Seahawks. I think what he's saying is quite revealing, and I think it's almost preparing everybody for what is around the corner here, which I think the Seahawks and Wilson are just heading for a divorce, and I fear that it could happen before free agency. And I think what we're seeing now is in different pockets of the media, including Silver, are saying things like, maybe they can get Miami involved. Maybe they can get Carolina involved. And I think the Seahawks know full well what they could get from the Bears and what they could get from the Raiders and the Saints. And they're just seeing if they can maybe get Wilson to consider one of the teams who have got the better stock, the higher stock in the draft. And if they can't make that happen, I think he's going to go to one of these 3 remaining teams. And the Seahawks will get a huge haul and they've got to move on from that. But that's what I fear right now. And I don't want that to happen, but that's what I think might happen. Have you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, and hopefully you can hear me a little bit better now.
Perfect.
Okay, great. So, yeah, it's super interesting. I do see a divorce coming with Russell Wilson, but to me, I don't assume that it's from the franchise. I do assume it's from the head coach. And it was going to put ownership in a really interesting position where they are going to have to choose between their 71-year-old Hall of Fame head coach and their 32-year-old Hall of Fame quarterback. And to me, it's lunacy to choose the former over the latter. But they also gave Pete Carroll the keys to the whole franchise. He doesn't really answer to anybody. And that's what he spent 40 years building for himself in his career. I think that Russell Wilson is probably with Seattle again this year. Like, I don't see his value going down after this year. I think the roster is set up for them to have another good season here. And I don't think one more year in Seattle damages his legacy. And so I think Seattle would like to avoid whatever size cap hit comes from trading him this year. I think he's still going to fetch a huge haul next year at 32 versus 31 or 33 versus 32. But at some point, the NFL gobbles up every great coach except for Belichick. At some point they all get long in the tooth, and the game outgrows the Shulas and the Landrys and the Walshes and all, and Gibbs and all these guys that had this incredible success. The game adapts too fast, and we're seeing that with Pete Carroll. He's still an unparalleled culture builder, an unparalleled CEO of a franchise, no question about it. But he is a average at best in-game coach now, and so many of the things that made him such a scary tactician when he first came to Seattle, the things like going for it on fourth down more than any other team in the league, trying to bury teams. I mean, I don't know if anyone listening remembers in 2012 when they started just bodying teams. They were up 44-0 against Buffalo and ran a fake punt in the fourth quarter. Like, he was there, like he was still trying to impress the college voters and get more votes at USC. And it was awesome, and it was scary. And that's gone now. Now he is timid, almost toothless on offense. And, his self-admitted overruling his coaches in the heat of the moment, which has led to these maddening delay of game penalties or the ability to get out of the huddle with more than 10 seconds left. So there's no time to read the defense at the line. Little things like that are getting away from him. And so I don't know if Jody Allen or anyone else is in the position or willing to take the keys away from Pete Carroll. But it seems to me abject lunacy to let Russell Wilson go, because there's only so many of them that ever come along, in favor of Pete Carroll at 71 years old.
Yeah, it's interesting that you were talking there about what it used to be like, Jackson, and it's very easy to forget, isn't it, that sort of early Carroll team was changing the NFL. That whether it was the big cornerbacks or it was this creating this physical defense that just scared the life out of teams, and it was Russell Wilson starting a quarterback who was very mobile, scrambling, exciting. Having the balls to start a third round rookie, instead of just conservative Matt Flynn, and having beast mode and all of the things that and trading for Percy Harvin, and the way that they worked in free agency, getting Bennett and Averill, everything was like setting so many trends, and to sort of just sit and witness it and sort of just to think the Seahawks were constantly ahead of the curve with every move they were making. And now you sort of sit back and you think the league seems to have passed them by a little bit. And I do think there are some aspects of what Pete's done that are kind of tried and tested that will always be important within the game of football. It's still the same game that it was 15 years ago. It just modifies all the time, and you have trends, don't you? But at the same time, there's nothing particularly daring, exciting, new, fresh, ahead of the curve about the Seahawks. And if they trade away the guy who has really kept them in the wins for the last few years, because I don't know how many winning seasons they would have had since 2014 without Russell, without the LOB. If they move him, did they immediately go straight back to the 7 and 9, seasons that we saw in 2010, 2011? Because there was a lot of games last season with the 12-win season that there could have been defeats, and that could easily have been a 9, 10, 11-win season. And if you're going to take Russ away, I mean, they only win Minnesota game because of Russ. They only win Dallas and New England because of Russ. I've forgotten half the games they only won because of Russ, and
even that second,
heck of a move.
Well, and it would be, and they're just. I mean, it took 40 years for Russell Wilson to come along. It could be 40 years before you have another one, and I don't know. Like, I think I paint myself a little bit online as being more anti-Pete than I am, but it comes from a place of look, like you, I believe that there is tension that has built between those two, which is natural. Like I said, a decade's an eternity in the NFL. You just don't see head coaches and quarterbacks stay together that long outside of New England. But it's something where I just don't see how you replace Russell Wilson. Like, sure, that's great if you free up a bunch of money, but it's not like spending that money is a guarantee that you're going to get all of this value. teams miss on free agents all the time. Teams miss on draft picks all the time. The hit rate is low on these things. So it's great to have a bunch of money. But you know what? Teams that have a bunch of money going into off seasons don't typically compete very soon. Like, it takes a while, and there's a lot of big misses on those. So, I mean, it would be great to have a bunch more money, but I'd rather have a quarterback. And I just don't see how you can look at the last few years, say even just the last 4 years, and say that if you replaced Pete Carroll with a league average coach, whoever that might be, and kept Russell Wilson, that you wouldn't have more wins than if you replaced Russell Wilson with a league average coach or quarterback and kept Pete Carroll. You know, if you've got, I don't know, Andy Dalton as your quarterback over the last few years, there's no way, I don't care how good Pete Carroll is, there's no way you're winning division titles and you know, making playoff runs. But you could put Mike Zimmer in and have Russell Wilson as your quarterback, you're still going to be winning more games. So I just hope that the franchise understands that, recognizes that, and prioritizes that.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see what happens. I'm sort of we'll move on to a couple of other topics, but just to finish on this Wilson thing, do you think that? I mean, I personally think that one way or another in the next, I mean, what are we now? The 10th of March, free agency starts in earnest in 5 days. I'd quite like to see a resolution either way. I think that if it's Pete and Russ coming out and saying we've buried the hatchet, we've come to some kind of, you know, truce, that it's not just a year-long truce, that it's a truce whereby I think it probably needs Wilson to say something along the lines of, I intend to finish my career in Seattle, or, you know, something like that, or that's what I'm hoping for, just to nip it in the bud. I wouldn't even be totally opposed to a contract extension because, as we've seen with Dak Prescott, who has a $22 million cap hit this year, you know, you could extend Russell Wilson's deal as a statement, you know, of he's our quarterback, he's not going anywhere, we're not going to have this chat again in 6 months' time. You could give him a new contract. And immediately just everyone's right. Russell Wilson's the quarterback for the next 5-6 years or whatever. I mean, you could even give him like an 8-year contract and like something like Mahomes. It could be something like that. If there's that in the next few days, great. If that, or alternatively, you know, just move on in the next 5 days. What I don't want, Jackson, is the Seahawks to go into free agency with all this mystery going on, because it will impact who actually wants to sign here. If they end up trading him down the line, you know, in the 3 weeks' time, they've missed out on the first flush of free agency to build a roster and to make some subsequent moves. We don't know what's going to happen in terms of replacement quarterbacks in the first few days of free agency. It impacts your draft plans. It impacts everything. I think they kind of need to make a call either way, so that by the 15th of March, we either know Russell Wilson is here to stay or Russell Wilson has gone.
Yes. Yep. I agree with that. I think clarity is super crucial in the next week. And you know, Seattle typically sits out the first wave of free agency anyway, but that might change if Russell Wilson isn't part of the future. So to me, I completely agree with all of that. To me, I hope that they just come out and say, you know, Russ is our quarterback, and that's that. You know, I mean, nothing they say is going to slow down the media frenzy that's surrounded this anyway. But I do think that it's interesting that in that Dan Patrick interview, the one that sort of got this ball rolling, and don't get me wrong, Russell Wilson and Mark Rodgers have done nothing to slow down all of this mayhem. But the quote that got bandied about and was posted everywhere was, you know, Dan Patrick asked Russell Wilson something like, you know, do you plan on being the quarterback of the Seahawks for the rest of your career, or something along those lines? And he said, that's a question for the Seattle Seahawks. And then immediately followed it by saying, but I hope to be in Seattle for the rest of my career. But no one's talking about the second half of that statement. Everyone's talking about the first half of that statement. They're saying, oh, well, that's up to the team, you know. But he also said, you know, I hope to stay here. And so he has said that piece. I would love to see the team just come out and reinforce that. But we also know that John Schneider is the ultimate tire kicker. He's going to field his phone calls. If someone says, hey, you know, I'm going to give you, you know, if Jacksonville says, I'm going to give you Trevor Lawrence and, you know, I don't know, Laviska Shenault and our next 4 first-round picks, well, you got to listen to that. But, you know, I agree with you. By the time that these free agents, the big-time free agents, start becoming available and you're starting to build your roster for 2021 and beyond, you got to know whether Russ is around.
Yeah, we've got a few questions I want to come to. I want to move on to this topic first, though.
Yeah.
So obviously, Carlos Dunlap has departed this week, and there has been a lot of talk about the importance of the O-line, and I obviously the O-line is very important. They're going to have to find a left. I would like to see them get an upgrade at left guard and center, whatever happens with Russell Wilson. But I also think, Jackson, that there's been this kind of annual Seahawks lose a pass rusher, then somewhat struggle to replace that pass rusher, and so they struggled to replace Frank Clark. They struggled to replace Jadeveon Clowney, and now Carlos Dunlap's going, and I hope they're not going to struggle to replace him as well. I think that this is as much of a priority for the Seahawks as finding a left guard and a center, is finding somebody who can rush the passer and get after it. Because the two lines, if anything about Pete Carroll's, the style that he wants to play, you'd think that is the first place they'd look, is the O-line and the D-line. Get after it. You see so many teams like the Giants game. The Giants beat the Seahawks with Colt McCoy because their two lines kick some ass up front.
Yeah, they did.
And you want to see, I'd like to see the Seahawks kick some ass in 2021, and that means improving both the O-line and the D-line. Now, they don't have much resource, and we can come on to that briefly, but I need to see them get a pass rusher, frankly, whether it's Dunlap or somebody else. I'm really hoping that's coming.
Yeah, totally. And you make such a great point. This has almost been it's a pattern with Seattle to prioritize pass rush in the midseason. They make a lot of acquisitions and things like that. But before even Clark and Clowney, you had Bennett and Averill got hurt and all that kind of thing. But it's something where they believe so highly in their ability to scout and develop pass rush. That's why they drafted LJ Collier, who actually I thought played really well down the stretch last year. They're super high on Darrell Taylor. The Malik McDowell pick killed him. That was just a tragedy for the franchise and for McDowell himself, obviously. But yeah, we're talking about a pretty piecemeal defensive line, and that secondary is pretty good. Like down the stretch, they were really good. The linebackers are excellent, but without a pass rush, you just can't win in the NFL. And one thing that I would like to see, and it kind of circles back to what you were saying earlier about making a decision on Russell Wilson, I would love to see them extend him and Jamal Adams, which are the two big clouds hanging over this offseason. And by extending them, you understand the cap better than I do, but my understanding is if you extend, that allows you to kick some cans down the road for when these new TV deals kick in and fans are back in the stadiums and you can anticipate 200 million plus salary caps. You want to kick those cap hits down a year or two, which you can do if you extend these guys. And so Seattle, I think, can have their cake and eat it too, based on my admittedly limited understanding of how the cap works. If you say Russ is our guy, we're going to give him 4 more years. Jamal Adams is our guy. We're going to give him 4 more years. And you move some money down the line. Bobby Wagner's got a ton of fungible funds right now. I think you can create $30-40 million of cap space to also then go be aggressive, because you've got your quarterback, your number one cornerback likely to leave, your number one running back likely to leave. I mean, the clock's ticking on the safeties, clock's ticking on Tyler Lockett in the next couple of years. Like you've got some big time contributors that you have to replace, and you need these offensive linemen that Russell Wilson wants, and you need this pass rush. So I would like to see them get aggressive in re-signing these guys that they're hopefully planning on being staples of the future in Russell Wilson and Jamal Adams, and use that leverage to free up money to go get aggressive in free agency this year.
It's a very interesting point, actually, about the cap, because Jerry Jones, people will be well aware of this by now, has apparently had a major impact in the negotiations on the TV deals, and has just signed Dak Prescott to a contract whereby, this is off the top of my head, I haven't got the numbers to hand, but I think it's $22 million cap hit this year. Then next year, it's about 37, I think it is. And then it goes up to 42 million and 47 million. Now, maybe by the time it gets to 47 million, there's 2 voidable years. They can't tag him again. The chances are that Dak Prescott, if it all goes well, will sign a new contract in Dallas within 2 to 3 years. That's what will happen with the Cowboys. So he may never see that $47 million cap hit. However, the fact that Jerry Jones has structured the deal this year suggests that probably within 2 years, this TV money is going to, so the economy will have recovered from COVID. The huge money will kick in, and that will be an opportunity maybe for teams to sort of get clever now and get ahead of the game and make some extensions. So I definitely don't think it'd be the worst thing. Yeah, I mean, with Russell Wilson, you could genuinely make some huge savings. I think with Adams, it's harder because you're adding cap. He's got 1 year left on his deal, whereas with Wilson, you could really lower his cap hit this year, kind of keep it at the same level for next year, which is about 37 million, I think. And then, you're going up and up from there when the TV money kicks in. But it's interesting. I think they've got to do something. And it's not just because I write a draft blog. It is genuinely because I have studied the draft a lot and in this year, and I can see some really attractive options between sort of pick 20 and pick 75. And I'd like to pick again in that range. The fact that they only have one pick in the first 140 picks it's probably killing John Schneider a lot more than it is me, because there are going to be so many good players coming off the board, and you do need some cheap talent. Damian Lewis cost $800,000 last year. You're going to need a couple of Damian Lewises on this roster because, like you say, you've got the guard, the center, the cornerback, the running back, third receiver. We've got a couple of tight ends who are moving on. Sam linebacker. I think I've got them all cornerback. There's a lot of positions.
So. Yeah.
There's a few positions to fill, and a couple of them are going to need to be rookies, probably on cheap deals. So
I think so. Yeah. So I have a question for you, because I know we're up against it, but I love picking your brain on this stuff because you understand the offseason so well. Are there guys in free agency? Let's say Seattle frees up some money to really compete for some frontline free agents. Are there 2 or 3 guys that you would be thrilled that you think are realistic to end up in Seattle?
That's a great question. I have actually put a list together. I've not published
this. Okay, all right. You don't got to give it away.
But I have got a list. So I mean, there's the obvious names that everybody will want, and they may well be priced out. Jackson of the and this is if Wilson's still here, I'd love to see them get a really top number 3 receiver. I mean, when you watch the Chiefs and you watch the Bucs in the Super Bowl, they've just got weapons galore. So if you could get a Curtis Samuel or a Will Fuller. Or a Jonnu Smith at tight end. John Brown
available.
Emmanuel Sanders is out there. You've got all these guys who could potentially come in at receiver. In terms of pass rush, there are all sorts of guys. Hassan Reddick is going to reach free agency. I think he'll probably get a lot of money. He was somebody I really liked in the draft. You've got your Ryan Kerrigans, haven't you? You've got people like that are going to hit the market too. Leonard Floyd, who we all know very well in Seattle, can get after the quarterback. William Jackson's a cornerback option from Cincinnati, who I think the Seahawks rated quite highly in the draft a few years ago. I'd love to go and look at that. And there's sort of players that you don't really think about. Like if the Seahawks don't get a linebacker, how much is Jared Davis going to cost? How much is Tyus Bowser from Baltimore going to cost to come and rush the passer?
Right.
If you're looking for a cheap running back, I always like Mike Davis. I know a lot of people seem to be off Mike Davis. He just got after it. He was explosive.
Totally.
He could cut. He was big. Go and get a Mike Davis. But for me, sort of like the main, my main focus has always been on, can you get a Joe Tooney? Can you get Corey Linsley? Can you really sort of shore up this? If you can't get Corey Linsley, can you get a Nick Martin, an Alex Mack, somebody like that? And then, we've got a little bit of time left, and people are going to have a go at me, Jackson, if I don't mention it. Bring Sherm home. That's been the campaign.
I would
get him back.
I would love to see what that re-entry interview looks like. The way that he torched the franchise on the way out. He spent the night before his wedding torching the Seahawks to Sports Illustrated. He was like a free agent for 6 hours before he signed with the division rival. Like, he left with some heat behind him. So I would love to have him back. I think that would be awesome. But there's
one thing I can safely say. There may only be one thing that I did better than Richard Sherman in my life, but that was the night before my wedding was not spent railing on the Seahawks.
Totally. Yeah.
We've got a couple of questions to finish. This is from Darren.
Sure.
It says, wondering to what extent you think the hiring of Shane Waldron will change the Seahawks offense. Do you think a complete change is in store for the O-line to match the zone run scheme? I'm not sure because Mike Solari is still there, but what do you think, Jackson?
Yeah, I think we're going to see a bigger impact in the passing game as a result of Shane Waldron. It's not easy to just switch offensive linemen from man blocking to zone blocking. It's really freaking hard to do. And you have to retrain your running backs and everything. I really hope they don't do that. But what was so obviously missing from this offense was quick passes and motion and a little bit of dynamic within 10 yards instead of just going for the hero shots. And Shane Waldron, I think, that's going to be the main impact that we see.
Well, there was another question. I'm just trying to dig it out here in the comments towards the end. It was a cigar related question, and I thought that was here we go. I've got it here from Mike. What cigar you're going to smoke during the draft this year? So we've got to, we've run out of time, but we can extend it for 30 more seconds.
Okay.
A recommendation on a good cigar for the draft.
First of all, this is my boy Mike Buford. I know Mike. I used to work with Mike. Mike, what's up? I am saving a Davidoff Year of the Rooster for the draft. This is a cigar that does not exist anymore. I'm lucky to have one of the last boxes in existence. I'm saving them for very, very special occasions. It's like $170 cigar. I will be smoking it for the draft.
There we go. So there's if you manage to find one of those somewhere, then there you go. Do you know it'd be great? It'd be great to do another one of these, at least one before the draft.
I'd love that.
And maybe you could a couple of suggestions of cigars that are still purchasable for anybody who wants to.
Yeah,
anybody wants.
Yeah,
to
I got plenty of those too.
Hey, Jack, we're going to carry on the conversation on a different podcast now. But it's been a pleasure speaking to you. It's been far too long. And I'm sure that everybody who's been listening has been delighted to hear your views because they're all big fans of cigar thoughts on field goals. And just a reminder to anybody listening, Silk's draft blog for all the analysis on the draft and on free agency and all of the stuff. Check out the YouTube channel because the podcast with Robbie's on there too. Lots of prospect interviews. I've got another one with Peyton Turner coming up, the Houston pass rusher, which will be published any day soon. There's been so much to talk about in the last few days with Dunlap and Russ and stuff like that. It's kind of just pushed it to one side, but there's already loads there. And look, there's a lot of hype about Quinn Miners online and the guy with the belly at the Senior Bowl, and he kind of looks like he should be in Game of Thrones. A lot of people want him on their team. But there was, here's an interview with him on YouTube. So while he's trending at the moment, I will plug that as well. Thank you all for watching, and we'll speak again very, very soon.